That for a slice of fried gold.
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
You would think after a break that we would have so many stories to tell each other, but nothing's happening in the world, so I don't really.
I mean, lots is happening in the world.
Yeah,
but nothing that we want to talk about. This show is an escape from all that shit.
Yeah. So I mean, literally.
Shit.
Yeah. So I mean, literally since the holidays, I have just seen my wife, and I've been in this house, and that's it. I didn't do anything special on New Year's. No parties of 100 or more gathered into a single building. I just watched it at home with my dogs.
I watched the one on Fox it was Joel McHale and Ken Jeong were hosting it, and it was a fucking train wreck.
That's so last year I remember watching it. Here's what happened to me too is I remember, were you here the one year we had a party and it was like Jamie was here and like other people, and it was Pitbull performed for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes or something like that.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, I just remembered that only because this year, whichever channel I chose first, Pitbull was performing again. And I'm like, this is not my New Year's. This is Pitbull don't perform. And so I changed it. Last year I watched the CNN, and it annoyed the shit out of me because
they were drunk.
They were drunk.
Anderson Cooper and the other guy.
Yeah.
The other guy was hammered. I don't know his name.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Well, Ken Jeong on the Fox one was definitely hammered. And they were like awkwardly dancing on a stage in a building that clearly had no audience. And then they would cut to Times Square, and it was Kelly Osbourne, who I don't think was drunk because I think she's sober, but she still acted kind of drunk because that's just the natural Osbourne way.
That's their personality.
And her co-host there on location was Jason Biggs. And let me tell you, the banter between the two of those was cringeworthy.
So because of Anderson Cooper, I always feel bad because I feel like you're just supposed to automatically support Anderson Cooper. But because of last year, I was like, these guys are hammered ass drunk, and it's annoying watching because I'm not hammered. I feel bad because I feel like you're just supposed to automatically support Anderson Cooper. But because of last year, I was like, these guys are hammered ass drunk, and it's annoying watching because I'm not hammered ass drunk. And this year I turned on CNN again after the Pitbull thing. I went to CNN, and there they were again, hammered ass drunk.
Yeah.
I was like, just within like 5 minutes, I knew. Like, I was like, this is the same as last year. CNN. I mean, God bless them that they can get paid to just get fucking wasted on television.
Must be fun. Yeah.
But so I changed it again, and I think I ended up with ABC, if I'm not mistaken, because it was on Hulu or something. Or maybe I went with NBC. I can't remember. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at all.
Yeah, Carson Daly was hosting it. So I was
that's the Dick Clark one. That's on ABC. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I was transported back to 98. Reagan and Nude. They did a video about how the New Year's balls are made. The farmer that bred them, they treated it like it was on a farm, and they bred them like they were cattle.
Oh, so they're doing a bit.
And the farmer was played by Big Pussy. And
from The Sopranos.
Yeah. And
if ever I was going to cast someone as a farmer.
Yeah, exactly. He seems like a farmer. And the whole bit was just sweaty balls, but just about the balls, the New Year's balls. Is like, oh, wow. I love your balls. They're so huge. Oh, look at my balls. Like, oh, my balls can do anything. And
comedy, the height of comedy.
Yeah, which was like funny for sweaty balls. But then this was
20 years ago.
I know. And this was like a 10 to 15 minute segment that you're like, wow, this has been done a 10 to 15 minute segment that you're like, wow, this has been done and better and not this long. And it was a lot of cringe. And then they threw to the Goo Goo Dolls, who look plastic now. And
Johnny Resnick.
Yeah.
Looks like he's slowly morphing into Mickey Rourke.
He does. It looks exactly like that.
Like post-surgery, post-boxing career, plastic surgery, Mickey Rourke. Yeah, he's slowly morphing into him.
It's just too bad because, well, you wanted banter. Here we are. It's just too bad because, he was a good looking guy. And, I don't want to body shame anybody, but there's just some people that you see them and you're just like, Jesus, that is too much.
Yeah.
Too much. Why? Like, too much. Why? Like, why can't you just be old?
Yeah, just embrace your age. This is going to be really fun banter for our listeners who hear us discussing New Year's Eve when this episode drops on like January 14th.
Yeah, so you can tell we record early. Sorry. Guess what? Spoiler alert. Death Rides a Horse took place before New Year, and we wished you a Happy New Year on that one. But Happy New Year again. And
a little peek behind the scenes.
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's a podcast dedicated to the history and evolution of cult and genre movies. I'm Gary Horne.
I'm Justin Bishop, and we are sadly missing our third co-host today, Mr. Todd Davis, not because he is in Asheville or forgot about us or anything this time. Todd is trying to recover from a little bout of COVID-19. Unfortunately, Todd's not feeling very well today.
Yeah, so there he is. So, all those comedy clubs, Todd.
Yeah, it's a bummer, but we're gonna have to do this one without him. Maybe when Todd comes back, hopefully next week, we'll be able to get his some short thoughts on this week's film from Todd, because I know we watched it because he was very excited to watch this movie and this entire series. So I know he's actually watched this week's and next week's movie already. So we'll at least get his thoughts at some point in the future on what we're talking about today. But this is week 2 of our series called The 6 Degrees of Kill Bill. These are films that have been noted as inspiration for Quentin Tarantino's 2004 film Kill Bill. And last week, it's funny because when I was making this list of movies, there's a lot that I could have chosen, and we kind of discussed this off the air after our last episode, Gary, but there's a lot, there are probably 25 movies that are somewhat referenced in Kill Bill, but I tried to pick those that were more direct influences, like where you can see exact shots or bits of music and things like that are taken directly from these films by Quentin Tarantino and used in Kill Bill. And it's pretty easy to see all of those, especially as we watch these movies. If you're familiar with Kill Bill, and it's a movie that I've seen more than most movies. Last week, we discussed Death Rides a Horse, spaghetti western, and we pointed out a handful of very specific things that Quentin Tarantino was culling from that movie. Things like of course, the Ennio Morricone score, which he uses in his film, to nearly like exact images, some of the background of characters, things like that. But I think of every film that we're going to discuss on this series, I think none of these films' influences felt as strongly as the film that we're discussing this week, which is Toshiya Fujita's 1973 revenge film, Lady Snowblood. Influences felt as strongly as the film that we're discussing this week, which is Toshiya Fujita's 1973 revenge film, Lady Snowblood.
Was from a better time, a time before coronaviruses, a time when if you were going to die, it was going to be because someone randomly wanted to stab you in the street. It just things were simpler
because
then.
or because they were exacting their revenge on you for killing your father and brother and raping and murdering your mother.
Yeah, I'd like to think I'm not going to do any of those things, but I'm still young.
Lady Snowblood began its life as a 51-issue comic book series that was published between February 1972 and March 1973. That series was written by prolific manga author Kazuo Koike, who also created Lone Wolf and Cub, which is a movie that we're actually going to discuss a little bit in a couple of weeks. And it was illustrated by Kazuo Kamimura. Now, I am going to do my best with these Japanese names, Gary. I'll go ahead and say that off the bat. I don't want anyone, I don't want anyone
I'm
coming
struggling
on
with
Twitter.
that and not doing the Japanese accent.
Kamimura. Now, I am going to do my best with these Japanese names, Gary. I'll go ahead and say that off the bat. I don't want anyone, I don't want anyone
I'm
coming
struggling
on
with
Twitter.
that and not doing the Japanese accent.
Do not do that. This is 2021, Gary. We have left that sort of thing in the past. But I did look up pronunciation on some of these to make sure I tried to be respectful of people's names that I'm not used to pronouncing, but I will almost surely fuck up at some point while trying to do this. So, give me some slack. I'm doing my best. So this magazine or this comic was originally published in a magazine called Weekly Playboy, which is not actually connected to Playboy, but like its American namesake, was considered an adult magazine. And although like Playboy, it also included columns, it included interviews with celebrities, and it included fiction, including a lot of manga. Actually, I went down here because I'm like, well, they have Playboy there, right? So this one's called Weekly Playboy. The actual Playboy, the one owned by Hugh Hefner that is published in Japan, is called Monthly Playboy, just to make sure people are aware.
That's weird. So there's no... Well, first of all, here's Justin with the I just read it. I'm just buying it for the articles argument.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that as an argument. I'm saying that those things do exist within the confines of the magazine.
Yeah, it's weird they don't have any lawsuits for that. But
it is kind of odd. But in
regards to the manga, though, there's some cool stuff to point out with that. I think that probably some of what would have caught the attention of Akuda, the producer, but besides being like a really cool Japanese story, or I'm sorry, Japanese revenge story, the story has like a lot of focus on the history of Japan, which I think gives it like even more weight and would have been more relevant and meant something to the people.
More so than like,
so it focuses a lot on that stuff, not unlike movies we even see now where it's like people are rushing to reinvent society and then people get buried and there's the caste system. Koike, is that how you said it? Koike.
Yeah, that's how I said it.
Yeah. He was talking about in the interview on the Criterion thing about there was a caste system, like they were coming right out of that, where it was like samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants. And but basically, like, this sounds similar to something now, but it's like samurai could just like kill somebody in the street if they just felt like it, basically. And so you just, nobody would question it because they were the authority. And so when you have a hierarchical system like that, it forms vendettas when society starts to be bending against you. And so you've got constant fighting and, of course, revenge. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting from the thing, like how much focus he seemed to have. And so you've got constant fighting and, of course, revenge. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting from the thing, like how much focus he seemed to have on that society and just his interest in the hierarchy there. Also, just as a side note, just the fact that Shirayuki translates into Snow White. And the Japanese title for the comic was Shirayuki Hime, so which is a play on their term for Snow White. Yeah, so Yuki comes from that. Then, Asura, like the Asura demon, that's like one of Buddhism's 5 paths. And that's the most grueling path. And just, I don't know, just neat stuff.
Yeah, it's very, this was a really fun one to look into because there is, I delved, like it sounds like you did, Gary, into a lot of the history side of things because I don't know. It once you know that context of the film, I think that it adds of things because I don't know. It once you know that context of the film, I think that it adds like I mean, it is just a badass revenge movie on its own surface level, but once you dive into that stuff, like it brings on a whole different aspect of the film, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's fun. It's cool to know that context because I like you said, I mean, for Japanese people, or especially Japanese people during the time this movie came out, even maybe I don't know. I don't know if people even in Japan right now have the cultural context for like when this was made or what they were going for. But it's just kind of interesting that much thought went into the process for what normally should be just a exploitation movie.
Well, in a comic book that was being published in a in an adult magazine,
right?
So the film adaptation was produced by Kikumara Okuda of Tokyo Films, which was an independent producer. Fujita was born to Japanese parents in 1932 in an area of in an area of Korea that is now known as North Korea. And he began his career in the mid 1950s at a studio called Nikatsu. So Nikatsu has a very rich and very long history in Japan. It's actually Japan's oldest major film studio, having been founded in the silent era back in 1912. In the mid 1950s is what many film scholars consider Nikatsu's golden age, most notably due to the production of their internationally flavored action films, directed by such filmmakers as Seijun Suzuki, who's incredibly famous. You know, we watched this movie on Criterion, and Suzuki's got a couple of films in the Criterion collection. Nakashi Nomura and Toshio Masuda. So Masuda, in particular, was incredibly prolific as a director, and he developed a reputation as a consistent box office maker. In the decade between 1958 and 1968, he made 52 films for Nikatsu. That's a film every 2 weeks, basically. I mean, that's insane.
Well, you know, he's playing to a smaller audience, so I'll give him credit there. Like he's just, you know, probably not American audiences, right? Like I don't want to take anything away from.
No, I mean, that's also in the 50s and 60s. A lot of films were filmed on a very much smaller time frame. I mean, that's something that you hear about it. Even, you know, we talk about Roger Corman and stuff. Roger Corman will make a movie in a week. And that's kind of what he's doing here. Like but it's still impressive considering the quality of his films. He's not making cheap little monster movies like someone like Roger Corman is making. He's making like legit films.
No, I'm not judging him. I spent, you know, most of New Year's watching horror movies and eating too much candy. So I wish that I had the life of Masuda.
So it was under directors like Masuda that Toshiya
horror movies and eating too much candy. So I wish that I had the life of Masuda.
So it was under directors like Masuda that Toshiya Fujita got his start, first working as an assistant director, then later as a screenwriter. And he quickly established himself as a very talented and essential member of the Nikatsu production line when he won an award for adapting the Yukio Mishima novel Thirst for Love in 1967. So that was a big hit. And it was not long after that Fujita began his own career as a director, directing entries in the Juvenile Delinquent and Stray Cat Rock series, which are kind of these youth-oriented action films. And both of those series marked his first association with an actress by the name of Meiko Kaji. So Fujita would soon start to specialize in, I read this really good essay by this film scholar named Mark Walko, who also actually produced those interviews from this guy. So we owe a great deal of gratitude to Mark Walklow, because the otherwise information on this without his work would have been very, very hard to find. But he described these films that Fujita was doing as edgy, realist youth films about aimless young people who were misunderstood by their parents' generation. So that's something that's a pretty far cry from the kind of standard, more formulaic Nikatsu action films that were being produced by other filmmakers.
He is the John Hughes of Japan. That's that's what he was.
Fujita was, he was very prolific. He even dabbled in directing entries in Nikatsu's line of Roman porno erotic films in the early 1970s. And that is another rabbit hole we could easily go down, looking into these Roman porno series, which are specifically the films that the adult films that Nikatsu was directing, but they were part of this whole movement of Japanese pink films and porno series, which were specifically the films that the adult films that Nikatsu was directing, but they were part of this whole movement of Japanese pink films.
That'll be the next series we do.
Japanese pink films.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're interested, you could find a lot of information out there. Synapse Films have put out compilations of Roman porno and Japanese pink films. So if it's a very, I don't know how, I've never seen any of the movies. I don't know I can't speak to the quality of them, but it's a fascinating piece of Japanese film history, because what it was is basically a lot of filmmakers they were given a lot more artistic freedom sometimes to do what they wanted in these films, because the producers didn't care what they were doing as long as they included some TNA, because they knew that would sell the tickets. So, and I mean, Fujita in particular produced a couple of these movies that by all accounts are very good films and like very high quality, especially considering that were being produced at the time, the other Roman porno films, a lot of which were just, essentially pornography, softcore pornography. But his apparently have, he's got that same through line of like disenfranchised youth that he had in like his Stray Cat movies and things like that. He's just having to throw in a sex scene here and there. So despite his successful career, nothing that Fujita had directed before would make him an obvious choice to direct the Lady Snowblood adaptation. And yet he was specifically chosen for the job by the film's producer, Kikumaru Okuda. So keep in mind, this film was not an Nikatsu production, but was produced independently. So he wasn't, this was a time when directors would work specifically with one studio in Japan. He worked with Nikatsu, although he had the option to work outside of that studio, unlike, say, in the studio system of the 30s and 40s in Hollywood. But this was not one of those movies. So it was not like he was given the job by the studio he worked for. Like a producer came to him directly and said, I want you to do this movie. Another interesting choice was the screenwriter, Norio Osada. So he was hired to write the adaptation, and nothing he had done before called him to direct a lurid, hyper-violent comic book adaptation. Before Lady Snowblood, he was known for writing Yakuza films for directors like Kenji Fukasaka, who did The Battles Without Honor and Humanity, which Miko Kaji also appeared in, I think, the second one of those, if I remember. Really good films. If you haven't seen Battles Without Honor and Humanity, I recommend checking those out. I think they're on Shudder. They were at one point. So Osada and Fujita knew each other personally. They were friends. They'd never worked before, and they were even employed by competing studios. But in an interview that's on that Criterion Blu-ray with Osada, he kind of speculates that the answer as to why he was hired might lie in the motivations of the producer, Okuda. So Okuda was inspired to buy the rights to the Lady Snowblood comic because of another manga to film series that not only featured another lead female that was studio, because we mentioned before she was in those Stray Cat movies, but she left the studio for its rival studio, Toei, and she basically did this because Nikatsu started shifting their focus to producing those Roman porno films, and she just didn't want to be a part of that. Those Stray Cat rot films had made her a star, which led to Toei seeking her out for the lead in a new film that they were doing called Wandering Genza Butterfly. So that was supposed to be like the start of a franchise. That didn't pan out. I think they did 2 movies total, but a new director by the name of Shunya Ito saw Kaji's performance and saw that she had a lot of potential and cast her as the lead in his debut film, which was an adaptation of a comic book series about a female prisoner named Scorpion. So that was the Female Convict Scorpion series, and it ran for 4 films from 1972 to 1973 and was a huge hit, both critically and commercially. And if you haven't seen those films, again, highly recommended. They're pretty awesome, honestly. When the producers seen those films, again, highly recommended. They're pretty awesome, honestly. When the producers of Lady Snowblood started courting Kaji for their film, she'd already said that she was like no longer interested in continuing the Scorpion series, and she was kind of getting tired and disenfranchised with the idea of playing in these violent roles in exploitation films.
I mean, what else is she supposed to do? You won't do porno. You won't kill people on screen. So what other movies can you do?
She wanted to be a serious actress. But she liked the idea of working with Fujita again. They had become friends and when they had done the Stray Cat Rock series, and they developed a good working relationship. They had a good rapport. So that might answer the question as to why he was hired to direct a film that seems to be so far out of his wheelhouse, and why they hired Osada to write the film. Because one, Osada and Fujita were friends. Fujita and Kaji had worked together and were friends. So this kind of is all to get what he wants out of the film. Because what he really wants is Miko Kaji in the lead. So this was kind of his roundabout way of getting it. He also, on that Criterion interview, Osada says that the producer, like him and Fujita, their writing and directing style, the type of films that they made were so different. I think he calls it like oil and water.
Yeah.
That the producer, Okuda, thought that, bringing them together, these two very different styles would create something kind of magical, because they shouldn't mix. But if they do, then it could be something really special.
Well, because Vegeta's like doing teen angst movies,
right?
Essentially, and people, Osada describes it as like he was used to capturing youth and the struggle with youth and in their mind, no way to release it. How do they describe how they feel? All of that stuff. So Okuda could have been thinking about that but Osada's making these. He knows violence, and it sounds like everything you read, the earlier stuff, feel all of that stuff. So Okuda could have been thinking about that but Osada's making these. He knows violence, and it sounds like everything you read, the earlier stuff regarding Japan that Koike was attempting in the manga, Osada seemed to latch right onto that as well.
Yeah,
and he's used to violence, and so there's like a lot of stuff that works really well in this, that lightning in a bottle thing almost. I mean, because when you see like that Osada interview, I mean, he talks a lot about the modernization of society, how it's evolving, and that can bring both light and shadows, I think is how he puts it. What gets discarded by modernizing the society. There's always going to be parts that get buried or mistreated or that become vengeful and that kind of thing. And they can, people try to move forward and forget that existed, but that's going to come back and seek revenge. It's also, I think, one of the reasons Osada talks about in some stuff that he's had authors of novels that didn't happen in Lady Snowblood. I think the author here just trusted him to get it right. But I like Osada. He seems like an interesting guy to hear speak and to hear him talk about stuff. Like how he tells the story about how him and Fujita, there's a tradition in Japan that you go hunker down in an inn and hang out together and figure out the objective of the film. But he's like pretty candid about this. Like, well, what you end up doing is getting drunk together and gambling a lot. And you're just kind of hanging out. He says, but through that, you start to learn each other and where your head's at and what you think about the film in general. So you get kind of an idea of what the focus is going to be. It even says like Fujita hates scripts. So that was already an issue. He likes everything to be more hazy, I guess, so he can have more freedom in what he's trying to do and play around with it. And even though he and Osada were friends, he didn't even like the script that he told Osada, it's all you, this is your job. You make the script, then didn't like Osada's script. And Osada were friends. He didn't even like the script that he told Osada, it's all you, this is your job. You make the script, then didn't like Osada's script. And it wasn't until they were out at another bar later with one of their other filmmaker friends, Fukasaku, I believe was the name. He said that he knew Fujita wasn't a fan, so he'd given it to Fukasaku to read. And Fukasaku, while they were drinking, just like talking, he was telling Fujita, like, man, this script's great. Like, if you're not going to make this, I'm gonna. Like, this is awesome. And so Fujita was immediately like, no, this is mine. I'm making it. And so it was interesting. Osada seemed to take like a personal interest in it. He like worked his way on set, was there the whole time, like just as a moral support. Like is how he convinced everybody. And he was friends with some of the actors and that sort of thing. But he also wanted to help be in the ear of Fujita, like during the time and like get it right. But he gives full credit to Fujita, by the way, just for what does work is face. There's like parts of it, the direction that she doesn't agree with or, whatever, that she wears it really well. And like her face is hiding sometimes her disappointment in certain things or the way that things are progressing in the story. And he says that he feels like Fujita is really great at capturing those facials and like just seeing all of that stuff. So it actually was a brilliant move on the part of the producers.
Yeah, it really was. And he talks often in that interview about the genius of Okuda about how he was kind of orchestrating all this behind the scenes, but it worked because the final film works very, very well. Also, it probably helped them get Kaji by they did offer her a contract to sing the film's title song because she had a burgeoning music career that she was trying to get to take off. So she gets to sing the film's theme song, which is there in the opening credits of the film and was later used by Quentin Tarantino, of course.
So he helped her music career take off, and she's a pop.
You had looked into her later career. I actually didn't. So
no, she's still making movies. I looked her up. I mean, she just she took like a hiatus at one point for a little bit, but she shows up in TV shows and other stuff. But I mean, she's been working, here recently. Like she's still just busting her ass as an actress.
Well, Lady Snowblood was released in Japan on December 1st, 1973. Modern reviews, meaning reviews that are out now in the age of the internet, are almost universally positive if you read them. It currently sits at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, but there are only like 7 logged reviews on the site. But there are lots of retrospectives, especially when like the Criterion Blu-ray came out, even when the DVD came out in like the mid 2000s after Kill Bill kind of let Western audiences know about this film. Essentially, a lot of those reviews, they're all pretty universally positive. Unfortunately, reviews from the time of the film's release are hard to come by. They're hard to find because it got very little. They're all pretty universally positive. Unfortunately, reviews from the time of the film's release are hard to come by. They're hard to find because it got very little of a release here in the States at all. And reviews of movies like this in the mid 70s were, if they existed at all, they have not been preserved. But I'm wondering, Gary, if you can shine a light on what some of the internet's best amateur reviewers might think of the film.
Oh, well, I'm glad you asked, because there are definitely a few people that were not fans of this film, probably after watching it when it was referenced by Quentin Tarantino as well. They weren't writing on IMDb in 1970. So, but yeah, definitely somebody needs a nap. So the interesting part with Lady Snowblood is that, I will say this, very few 1-star reviews I could find anywhere. Very few. But they're legitimately very well written. It's actually really smart people, it seems like, writing it. So it doesn't make for nearly as much fun to make fun of them. So it's because you're like, wow, these people really did watch the movie and have some thoughts and analysis to offer. And they're just,
it's not just like somebody crying about there being subtitles and
right, exactly.
Oh, the blood color's not realistic.
Like our number 1 here is from John H., who gave it 1 star, and his comment is too fakey Japanese.
Too fakey. Wow.
I don't know what he was going for there, but yeah, that's what
I don't like it either way.
Yeah. The other one here, let's see.
Was that his whole review?
That was the whole review.
Oh. That was it.
Yeah, that was it. That's
too
what he said.
Too fakey Japanese was his
too
entire
fakey
review.
Japanese. And then there's GH Cheese 9, who says the title of his review: "You'll wish you were stabbed with a sword, so you won't have to watch the rest. The story itself is so bad, you would think it was written by a bunch of 11-year-old boys. I saw the rating and I saw the reviews. I had to watch it. I'm guessing the reviews were written by some of the film students who think they're all knowledge and will make you watch bad movie after bad movie while they explain to you the concept of art in movies."
Wow.
That is what he said.
It's an angry young man.
Yeah, seriously, here you go. I'm just going to do this. This is an example of a 2-star review, though, for this. It's called Film Buffs Be Warned. It's from Sky 2. "Don't get me wrong, I love a cheesy samurai film as much as the next guy. However, this one is more cheese and more low budget than most. Kaiji Maiko, who had starred in 3 of the cult phenom Sasori films, chooses the scenery as the title character, raised for the sole purpose of avenging the death of her parents at the hands of a group of leering. Kaiji Maiko, who had starred in 3 of the cult phenom Sasori films, chooses the scenery as the title character, raised for the sole purpose of avenging the death of her parents at the hands of a group of leering outlaws. The twist of having a female play the cold-blooded sword person might sound intriguing, but it can't compensate for the hammy acting, poor photography, sappy Inca ballads, a villain straight out of the silent movie era, and slapdash plotting that looks like what it is, a condensed version of a longer story that tries to compensate with an extended narrative. The whole film has the feel of a quickie that was made to cash in on the original comic series, and attempts by the filmmakers to appeal to the broader crowd are just plain awkward. Not convinced? This movie, based on a comic by creator of the Lone Wolf series, was released after the first 5 Lone Wolf films had hit theaters in the previous 20 months. That doesn't exactly inspire confidence. The Grand Guignol style special effects can be unintentionally laughable, as every slash lay out of place in her role. And there are decent moments when she's faced with the unpleasant task of slaying one of her enemies when she has been reduced to an invalid dependent upon his devoted innocent daughter. As a whole, however, the film can only be recommended to undiscriminating genre buffs. If you're looking for a film that is sort of actually worth seeing for more spewing arteries and overall melodrama, you'd best look elsewhere. Anyway, that's a 2-star review. So there's a step up in the level of discussion.
I still don't agree with a lot of his points, but that is at least more thought out than a lot of the other reviews that we've read of other films.
He sounds like a person who's educated.
Right, you're right. It's not just like a knee-jerk reaction. Well, despite that, though, I mean, the film was very popular at the time, popular enough to spawn a sequel in 1974. And Lady Snowblood, Love Song of Vengeance, Lady Snowblood 2, reunited the director, writer, and star of the first film, although its plot is not based on any story from the manga. I watched Lady Snowblood 2 last night. That's one I had actually never seen. I've seen the first one a few times, but I'd never seen part 2. And, it's all right. It's not nearly as good as the first film. It's the third act is pretty outstanding. Still very good looking of a film. I think it's still visually very cool. Not quite as visually cool as the first film, but the story is just not quite as compelling to me because it's not a revenge tale this time. But it's still worth watching. If you've got that Criterion Blu-ray, it's included or it's on the Criterion channel. So it's worth checking out if you got an hour and a half. You want to watch, see what the further adventures of Lady Snowblood are. There was also another adaptation of the original manga called The Princess Blade that came out in 2001. So it's continued to be popular. But of course, the film's greatest legacy, I think, lies in the influence that the film had on Quentin Tarantino and specifically on Kill Bill. So it's continued to be popular. But of course, the film's greatest legacy, I think, lies in the influence that the film had on Quentin Tarantino and specifically on Kill Bill. So let's talk, because this is what this whole series is about. Let's talk about some of the elements that Tarantino took from this film, because it's like watching this time, I was constantly like seeing one thing after another, and I'll name a few things, and I'll probably not name everything. I was gonna make a joke that I don't see it, but no, definitely this movie is clearly above all others. This is the influence for Kill Bill. Yeah, I mean, of course, both films are about women who are fueled by revenge, and Yuki's motivations are very different than the bride's, and maybe have some supernatural elements. It's hinted at, but her methods are very similar. Because like the bride, Yuki has a list of names that she's backstory, which is pretty similar to in Kill Bill, how that movie handles Oren Ishii's backstory, which is done in the style of an anime. Although the specifics of her backstory we discussed on our last episode owe a little bit more to Death Rides a Horse, but the style of that by doing it animated is definitely closer to what this movie is doing. And of course, the opening of this film and the closing of this film with Yuki fighting in the snow is specifically referenced in the bride's fight with Oren Ishii at the end of Kill Bill Volume 1. And if that visual wasn't referenced enough, Tarantino uses the Lady Snowblood theme song, the one sang by Miko Kaji, Flower of Carnage, in the end credits of Kill Bill as well. And then you've got the flashbacks where we see Yuki training, which is a sequence that's heavily inspired a similar sequence in Kill Bill, where the bride's training under Pai Mei. There are specific shots in this film, that are lifted. Is a sequence that's heavily inspired a similar sequence in Kill Bill, where the bride's training under Pai Mei. There are like specific shots in this film, you know, that are lifted by Tarantino. Hell, even the finale of this film mirrors the finale of Kill Bill, because it takes place on like a crowded dance floor. You know, it's a very different situation, but I think he's definitely pulling that from this film as well.
Oh yeah, there's so many things. I mean, just like you said, just like shots you'll see that you're like, oh, I've seen that in Kill Bill, because I saw Kill Bill before I ever saw this, obviously. But it just like it, and even, I mean,
well, there's that shot where you see the 4 people who have attacked her family, like from below. You know?
I was thinking of that exact one. Yeah, you see that with all of Bill's gang. Yeah. And there's the foot on the snow, like just the way. Yeah, there's a lot of different things. And
the use of chapter titles too is a very
that's a big one. Yeah,
which Tarantino's done in other films as well, but that's definitely inspired by this film. And this also kind of bounces back and forth in time, the story here, much like Kill Bill does. I mean, Kill Bill is a non-linear story, and this is as well. I do love those chapter titles in this, by the way. They're pretty amazing. Like Vengeance Binds, Love and Hate is a good one. My favorite, though, is Crying Bamboo Dolls of the Netherworld. That's a pretty outstanding chapter title.
That should be its own movie.
I know, right?
But yeah, I think Osada even references that like that's a pretty standard practice in Japanese screenwriting, that you would like chapter the screenplay.
But you don't normally put them on screen.
But you don't ever put them on screen. And this was the first time he'd ever seen that happen. So I don't know if this was, the first time ever, but that assailants, the initial assailants that she kills, that Snowblood kills, coming back for revenge later. I mean, that doesn't specifically happen in Kill Bill, but you can see that story happening. Like,
it's actually a sequel that Tarantino has talked about for years, where Vernita Green's character, Vivica Fox's character's daughter, at the beginning of the movie, Tarantino's always said he's going to do a follow-up to Kill Bill where she's coming to get her revenge on the bride. I don't think it'll ever happen, because Tarantino just likes to talk about ideas a lot, but you do see that happen here.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was neat. It was, and I thought that was just going to be like left hanging, because I'd never seen this movie, but I thought it was going to be left hanging, and no, they actually followed up on that in the movie. Yeah. So it's kind of.
So you'd never seen this before?
No, I'd never seen it.
What did you think? First impression?
I liked it. I mean, it's kind of.
So you'd never seen this before?
No, I'd never seen it.
What did you think? First impression?
I liked it. I mean, the thing with a lot of these movies is, I think it's like, in general, Japanese cinema, for some reason, it's played out longer than what we can be used to. I know you always hate that like I bring that up. I always used to make fun of Leonard Maltin for it, and now I catch myself doing it all the time. But that the story.
This movie's only an hour and a half long, Gary.
I know, but it feels like, I mean, it could have, there's just scenes of just talk, like that's not, you can totally see it in, in Tarantino movies now, but, it's just not what people over here, I think, were accustomed to initially. But no, I mean, there was nothing about it I found boring or anything. It just, it's just interesting to like get yourself in the groove of stuff. It's just interesting to like get yourself in the groove of how it tells the story. I don't know. It's hard to put a finger on exactly, but I thought it was a blast. I mean, I love just how, I don't know, going into it, what I expected, a more artsy film or something. Although I say that, I'm not knocking the craft. I just mean, this is clearly also a splatter film. Like if
it's
somebody
an exploitation film.
If somebody got a fucking paper cut in this movie, they would lose like a gallon of blood instantly. Right. Like it's incredible. But
I mean, it is a blood splattered revenge film. It's splatter's not even the best word for it. The blood sprays in this film like it's coming out of a fucking garden hose. Like it's insane, and it's this bright red blood. Like we've talked about, with like an Argento movie, like that bright, or even, on our Romero series, and being like a melted crayon, and he kind of hated it at first, but that's what they're doing here. Like this bright red blood, but it puts it in that heightened reality of like a comic book world.
Yeah, I think by far the most incredible thing about this movie is the visual aspect of it.
Well,
like
the artistry on display is I think head and shoulders above what you would normally see in a quote unquote exploitation film. I think a lot of that credit has to go to Fujita. I think a lot of that credit also has to go to his cinematographer, Masaki Tamura, because I think they both do pretty incredible work here. I mean, some of the shots in this and in the second one, honestly, are like you could freeze frame them and hang it on a wall as art. Like it's really well done stuff, beautiful stuff.
There's also stuff like this is not like you have to think it's deliberate. Like I don't know. There's just so many shots that are just so perfectly. There's also stuff like this is not like you have to think it's deliberate. Like I don't know. There's just so many shots that are just so perfectly crafted that even if I don't get them all, even after research, like for instance, the very last one, Yuki kills the main bad and he falls and lands on the floor, and then there's like blood splatter and it hits like the Japanese and the American flags.
The flags,
and like, yeah. It's just like a perfectly shot scene and has to mean something. I don't even know what that means, but it's something. Like it's just like there were. I guess I'm saying it feels like every shot was very intentional. Like they had a reason for doing everything in this movie. And that's a level of, sometimes when we say exploitation film, it can come across as like, we're just throwing blood and guts at everything for no reason. And
well, they knew that the exploitation aspects of it.
Right. There's just so much more that went into this. That's pretty incredible.
Incoming transmission.
Hey folks, it's your old friend Mr. Todd A. Davis from the Cinema Shock podcast, here to ask, are you tired of seeing a random episode of Star Trek and thinking, I wonder where this falls into the overall prime timeline? I know I am. That's why I'm bringing you a new podcast covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order. It's called Computer Resume Podcast. Each week, join me and a rotating panel of my family and friends as we boldly talk Trek like no one has before. If there's a joke to be made, we'll make it. And if there's a poignant discussion to be had, well, we'll try our best. We'll also have interviews, contests, take listener questions, and other things currently deemed classified by Section 31. Those shifty motherfuckers. So join us every week starting in January of 2021 for the Computer Resume Podcast, free wherever you get your podcasts. And be the first to hit us up online now at Computer Resume on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or email us directly at computerresumepodcast@gmail.com. The Computer Resume Podcast, part of the Slice of Fried Gold Network. # LLAP. We'll see you soon.
I also, I know you probably got a lot more to talk about. I want to skip over Toshio Kurosawa. No relation, by the way. I tried to find it, but he's Ryure in the movie, the newspaper guy, and he or newsletter guy. I don't know. He seems like just like early, like he was doing a psychotronic cinema newsletter,
doing a zine, yeah,
doing a zine. But anyway,
and
that guy.
Can you imagine how long it takes him doing that calligraphy like that?
I don't. That's
doing a zine,
yeah, doing a zine. But anyway, that guy.
Can you imagine how long it takes him doing that calligraphy like that?
I don't. That's my other thing.
Watching Japanese calligraphy being done, by the way, is one of the most soothing things to me.
It really is. So I was trying to balance this thought out by I was gonna say like it's soothing and peaceful. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
With respect, I just don't know how it works. Like I'm not sure how many words you're getting in with one of those well-crafted symbols.
Yeah.
So it looks like it would have taken him, like 40 hours a week would just be doing a paragraph.
Right. Yeah.
And so anyway, I liked his character a lot. I thought he was really good. And he's, I looked him up to see he's still around. He's still acting also. And he just was like, apparently in those Toho days, he first started in the movie Samurai as one of those working actors.
A contract player, yeah.
But
yeah, he is really good in this though. And of course, Miko Kaji is incredible, I think, in this film. I mean, she just has an incredible presence in the film, I think. She says a lot with her eyes. She's got very big, expressive eyes, and she does a lot with just like that, like ice cold stare of hers, like just glaring at people. Like, I feel like she says so much with that. It made me think of like Clint Eastwood in like The Man with No Name, like his Sergio Leone movies, like the way she'll just like glare at people the way that he does, and just, you don't have to say a word, like, you know what's on her mind.
Yeah. No, she's perfect. I mean, she carries the film right along with the visuals and what I was talking about earlier. Just Fujita's great at capturing like her emotion in her face, and that's awesome.
Because she plays it mostly silent.
That's awesome.
Because she plays it mostly silent. You know, I mean, she doesn't talk a lot. She talks, but she doesn't talk a lot in the film. She's not a talkative character. She's about as quiet as, I'd say, Clint Eastwood's character in those spaghetti westerns. And that silence, though, that's actually part of what helped her get the gig, because that was a holdover from what she was doing in those Scorpion, the female prisoner films. Because in those films, and maybe we'll do a series on those one day, I'm sure we will, but it'll probably be a ways down the line. But she actually specifically requested that some of the lewd dialogue from the manga be scaled back. So she played that role mostly silent, and she took kind of a similar approach here as well. But I don't know, the way that she plays it and the way that her character is written, like the combination of the two, is part of what I think makes Lady Snowblood stand out from so many other revenge films. Because Yuki's journey is ultimately, like the combination of the two, is part of what I think makes Lady Snowblood stand out from so many other revenge films. Because Yuki's journey is ultimately a tragic story. I mean, she hasn't really had a life outside of training and exacting revenge, because she was literally born to do this. Like, her mother had a child with the goal of training that child to murder people.
Yeah, I think that aspect you're talking about is, I think there's a struggle in there with her sometimes that, again, it probably has to be credited to Fujita, because I don't know that Osada like threw this in the script necessarily. There are moments in the movie it feels like you can actually see her struggling with the fact, like maybe even where she meets I can't remember all the names here, but the daughter, you know, who's throwing the even when they meet later in the brothel, like she seems to have an affection for her. So there's like parts of her that want to be heartfelt and
like a normal person,
and then but she's just like got this built-in like programmed thing in her brain that her only objective is revenge. Like, even the moment where they think that the big bad is dead, you know, or whatever, you can see her struggle with that. Like, she's like malfunctioning for a second. It almost feels like in her brain, because she's just like, what the fuck do I do? This guy's already dead.
That's what I was supposed to be the one to take him out.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's her, and I think that's Fujita, just doing the part that you hired Fujita for, like capturing that stuff without specifically saying that.
Yeah, I think a great moment that he brings to it, which again was not exactly spelled out in the script, and I know that because the screenwriter talks about it in the Criterion interview, is at the end, after she's beaten everyone, and she just like goes down on her knees and breaks down and starts wailing in the snow. Like, it's almost like she's finally at that point allowed to feel, you know, because she has accomplished her goal.
Right.
And I think in the script, he just wrote the word tears is what he talks about.
Yeah. He talked about it being an experiment. He wrote the word tears. Like, he wanted to see what they would do basically with that.
But it's not just her, like, it's not, and he pictured it with like a single teardrop, you know, but she like is breaking down and having a meltdown at the end of it.
Yeah, because what else is she gonna do now? Like,
right, exactly. That's what she was living for. So we talked a little bit, you touched on this a little bit when we were talking about the writing of the comic book, but I think the historical context, like we said earlier, once you look into it and you understand the context, it adds a lot to the power of the film. It's set during the Meiji period, which is a period in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when Japan was making a difficult transition from an isolationist feudal society to a more modern, more westernized nation. So under if you're unfamiliar with Japanese history, these periods that you read about are often named after the emperor that's overseeing them. So under Emperor Meiji, it was during this time that the country began to be influenced greatly by Western society in a very short period of time. I mean, this was a period of, I don't know, maybe 60 years, 50 years, maybe less than that. I think it was about 50 years. But they were being influenced by Western science and technology, maybe less than that. I think it was about 50 years. But they were being influenced by Western science and technology, philosophy, political and aesthetic ideas. You started seeing them wearing, more westernized clothing, and such a widespread adoption of radically different ideas than what had been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years in Japan led to some profound changes in their society. So, like Gary, you mentioned earlier that the shogunate and its class of samurai warriors, they were gone at this point. Like, they were done. When they were gone, that whole caste system was gone. And this was a caste system which had enforced strict codes of social behavior for like 2 centuries,
Right.
And as such, the Lady Snowblood character, Yuki's character, kind of exists on the precipice of this new Japan. It makes me think of kind of exist on the precipice of this new Japan. It makes me think of these Westerns, like especially something like The Wild Bunch, like a Sam Peckinpah Western, where they're set kind of at the end of the Old West, but there are like modern elements coming in. If you've ever seen The Wild Bunch, you know that there is a Gatling gun that makes an appearance in the finale of the film, which is definitely something that would not have happened in a Western set 30 years earlier. But you've got these characters that exist in kind of a moral gray area, much like Yuki does, and are kind of unsure about how they're going to fit into this modern world, because she kind of does go through this film like a Ronin, like a masterless samurai, like she just goes from place to place killing people,
Right.
And what is she going to do in a world when modern technology starts to come into play? And it's very
Light and shadows, again, like what Osada had said.
Well, Osada says that it's a period where like they were losing their identity as Japanese a lot of times because they were adopting.
Yeah, you're
so much
adopting all
Western
these other
culture.
things, which are supposed to help you like move along as a society. But yeah, they're like cultural things that you're used to that bind you together as a people, that you don't want to lose hold of. And it's like some of these things end up getting buried and people get left behind, or people who don't want to move along, or people that, I mean, even in the flashback to where Yuki's mother loses her husband when they're moving into the town. I mean, that's all part of like, it was becoming a more militaristic Japan during that time. These people, tried to collect taxes, that sort of thing.
Talking about the gang?
Well, so the gang is directly part of, they're in retaliation almost, right? Like they're in retaliation for the fact that things are changing. The gang takes advantage of the situation because they know things are changing. And so they're taking advantage of the situation by telling the citizens, like, you can pay us and you won't have to pay the tax man basically when he comes.
Well, there's also been a national draft, which is a very Western concept. There's been a national draft at this time, and they're also saying, hey, you pay us and we'll keep you from getting drafted.
Yeah, and
basically.
maybe that's it. Maybe I'm mixing up some of the stuff, but I mean, essentially, like they think this guy coming in is that guy, so they kill him because they think it's gonna fuck up their plans
Right.
for what they're doing already. Stuff, but I mean, essentially, like they think this guy coming in is that guy, so they kill him because they think it's gonna fuck up their plans
Right.
for what they're doing already because of what's changing in the world. And so it's like it's all like a snowball effect. Snowball. See,
Hey, I see.
Yeah,
I get it.
but yeah, it's all this effect of like the military complex is occurring, the government's changing, so the citizens are doing this thing, so the gang retaliates, and then that causes the death of this guy who they misidentify as something, which also leads to the revenge story of Lady Snowblood. It's
Right.
all a bunch of stuff like we kind of mentioned at the beginning that like would be completely lost on you right now watching it normally in 2021.
Yeah, unless you've done a bit of research.
Right,
like we did.
exactly.
I feel like that the gang that Yuki's hunting down that kills her father at the beginning of the film, they're kind of symbolic. Like they are that they're perpetrating on these villagers is also a result of this changing society, because they're kind of capitalizing on people's confusion about what is going on because things are changing so fast. And then one of the gang members, Tsukamoto, who I believe is the last guy who gets killed, he becomes a powerful figure in this new westernized government. So by killing them, Yuki is not only like avenging her family, but she's also kind of avenging these poor peasants who were exploited during this time because Japan was rushing so quickly towards modernization. So it really is sort of almost a lament for what Japan was losing at the time as well.
There's a lot to take in about this whole story we're kind of covering, but in respect to Tarantino, I guess we can't go too deep into this because we'll eventually get to Kill Bill and we can have this conversation a little more. Or maybe one day there'll just be a Tarantino series where we can't go too deep into this because we'll eventually get to Kill Bill and we can have this conversation a little more. Or maybe one day there'll just be a Tarantino series where we can have it deeper. But I am curious. A lot of stuff I ran across for some reason with this one, and probably because it's the most connected to Kill Bill, is discussing how Tarantino just rips things from other movies. And there seem to be a lot of people that have a hard time with like grasping that like he's remixing or redoing like scenes he's seen in movies that he liked. And is that just ripping them off, or is it what is it exactly? Like my thought initially was like, well, no, but he doesn't have the depth of all of this stuff we're talking about with Lady Snowblood, but also most of you probably wouldn't have seen Lady Snowblood if not for Kill Bill.
Yeah, exactly. Including me, including you.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you can't really hate on it for that.
Yeah.
Like it's like this movie does have a lot of depth and a lot of stuff going on. But
yeah, I think we'll probably talk about that more on our Kill Bill episode. But I personally have no issues with the way Quentin Tarantino uses elements of other films. I think it's actually incredibly interesting. And as someone who loves looking into like other films that I'm not aware of, it has brought a lot of films to light for me that I might not have discovered otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's sort of Tarantino's version of film education.
Yeah, because I almost feel like, and maybe you would disagree, but I think about movies like, say, The Matrix that too are pulling from those inspirations, but because Tarantino is so like open and forthcoming about his,
he'll tell you.
Yeah, it's like it's almost helping cinema as a whole in that aspect, that he's like, no, Lady Snowblood, yes, obviously there's straight scenes from that movie in this movie. And
yeah, I mean, he loves this movie. I know one writer that I read talked about sitting next to him at a screening of this film, or sitting like on the row behind him or something, and this was before there was a good version of it out there, and they were watching it. It was in Japanese, but the subtitles were German. And they're not, this guy doesn't speak German, but he has seen the movie before, so he's able to talk about it. And he said Tarantino was doing the same thing. Tarantino was like with somebody, and he knew the film so well that even not speaking Japanese and not speaking German, he was able to like keep his friend up to date. Like, all right, this is what they're saying. This is what's going on. And he knew like every single aspect of the film. This is, and I mean, I don't want to get too far into it because, yeah, we have a whole episode on Kill Bill, but Kill Bill's his love letter to movies that he loves. It really is. And this is the biggest influence. And I think this is a really cool film. I mean, it is, there are a lot of aspects of it that you'll see in exploitation movies, and you'll even see in a couple other movies we're going to talk about on this series. Things like the spray of blood, which, Tarantino uses in Kill Bill, especially in Volume 1.
I was going to say, especially in that, like
the House of Blue Leaves. Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you start really digging into this movie, you do see that there's a lot more to it. Like, especially like the historical context stuff is super interesting to me. Like the depth of this film is greater than most quote unquote exploitation movies. Like another one, you mentioned this earlier, but the term that they call her in the film is Asura, which is apparently I'm curious if I'm curious if my old DVD of this, which I bought right after Kill Bill, had a different translation. But apparently earlier translations of this, they just they called her like Child of Hell or just simply demon. But the term Asura is like more specific to Buddhism and tougher to like directly translate. And in Buddhist lore, it's a wrathful demigod, an Asura is, whose desires can never be satisfied. Like they just have to, they have to keep going, and that's sort of similar to Yuki's desire for revenge, like this is what she's literally been bred for. And there's nothing else that can really fill that void in her.
Yeah. I forget if it was, Keiko or Asada talk about, because he's just like writing what he Koike, maybe that's it. I feel like I keep fucking up his name. It's so
Koike, yes.
Yeah, Koike. So he knows, like he's a Buddhist. He studies like the martial arts and like sword play and that sort of thing. So he was just, when he wrote the story, he was just like writing the stuff he knew. He was trying to pour it all out into one page. Like he had he'll even tell you in that Criterion DVD about like he basically started with the premise of like, how do I do this? So he's like, well, there's no female revenge stories. There's no, it's all these guys. It's
right,
that sort of thing. And so he
even the stuff he had been writing, like Lone Wolf and Cub.
Exactly. And so he wanted to start with this female, and he's like, how does she get there? And so he starts with like, well, her parents would be dead. And then it's like, all right, what's the story there? So he wanted to start with this female, and he's like, how does she get there? And so he starts with like, well, her parents would be dead. And then it's like, all right, what's the story there? So he's like working, he kind of takes you through the process there of like what he was thinking about. And but one of his things is that, yeah, the Asura, or as Yuki's mom calls her, a Asura demon, like says you're going to be an Asura demon, that sort of thing, is like, yeah, there's a I guess you would say a darker side to Buddhism, that one of the 5 paths is this, because you're trying to reach enlightenment generally in Buddhism, like in whatever way you can. One of the 5 paths is this Asura path, which is like, you're trying to reach godhood by any means necessary, basically. Right.
I think he even says like
you're just like not taking any shit. Like you're it's the grueling method. It's like fighting against everything physically if necessary, to like reach this point. And so it's one of the 5 paths that's talked about. But yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, the thought that went into it.
Who knew that talking about an exploitation movie that most people just see as like a woman on a roaring rampage of revenge with geysers of bright red blood would lead to talks about like the Meiji era of Japan and the history of of Japan and Buddhism.
That's it, man. I mean, that's the thing. That's why this movie is a work of art, and that's why it deserves to be discussed. And it's a good thing that it survived. It came back. It became relevant again, and Criterion restored it, and all of the shit. It's well worth it. It's a part of cinematic. All of the shit. It's well worth it. It's a part of cinematic history and a brilliant part of it, and fun. It's just fun to see a guy get both hands cut off.
Well, that's the thing. Even if you don't know all the like historical context and things like that, like it's just a fun movie and beautiful to look at. Like you understand why Tarantino was struck by like the image of like bright white snow with this cartoon red blood being splattered across it. Like that's a striking image. And you know, when she slices into someone with a sword and then there's that slight delay and then you see that geyser of blood, like it's incredibly satisfying to watch. It's super fun. And just this far away from realism to be like, it doesn't feel gross or anything. You know, it's not like gore in the way that we think of gore in a lot of like a Eli Roth movie, you know. It's a very different type of violence.
There's a lot
of gore in a lot of like a Eli Roth movie, you know. It's a very different type of violence.
There's a lot of heart that goes into it, and then at the end of the day, if you just want to see what would happen if somebody tries to slice somebody in half with a katana, that also happens.
Yeah, exactly. So I did have another little short, I guess we could call it a new segment that I wanted to try to do when we can, when it's appropriate on the show. And that's if you want to watch things that are similar to this or things that we think would make maybe a good double feature, things like that, for further viewing, for further homework for you. If you want to watch another movie that we think would be a good follow-up to this, I wanted to give a couple of recommendations. Of course, the first one, the easiest one, is Lady Snowblood 2, which if you're watching this one on Criterion or somewhere like that, you can rent, you can watch on there as well, or you can rent it pretty easily. But also, we mentioned it earlier, but the female prisoner, interesting, if not more so than this movie. It's a gorgeous movie to look at. It is designed incredibly well. It's really cool. It's set in modern times, so it's got a very different feel from this movie. But her character, Scorpion, has a very cool look. Like she wears this big kind of floppy black hat, and she just looks like a badass. It's a great movie. It's really, really good. As of this recording, all 4 of the movies are on Shudder. So they're pretty easy to access. They're pretty easy to find. Arrow Video, I believe it was, put out a box set of all of them a year or 2 ago. So they're very easy to find. Another one I actually watched this morning because I was curious about these. We talked about the Nikatsu action movies.
Right.
Just started looking into some of those and see which ones I had access to. And I watched one. It was actually by a director by the name of Takashi Nomura, who we mentioned early on in the show. He was one of the guys that Fujita worked under. And there's a movie of his called A Cult Is My Passport that is kind of a noir, who we mentioned early on in the show. He was one of the guys that Fujita worked under. And there's a movie of his called A Cult Is My Passport that is kind of a noirish action movie from this time. Came out in the late 50s, early 60s. And it's pretty badass. It's really good. It's got a lot of, so it feels like a film noir. It's a story about a hitman who's been betrayed. You know, not your most original story, but the way it's told is really cool. And it's got some like major spaghetti western vibes. And this is kind of before spaghetti western was really a well-known thing. Like, but there's some visuals in it that are very spaghetti western-esque. And the score, a lot of times, sounds like Ennio Morricone doing a spaghetti western.
Oh, really?
So it's pretty cool. It is currently streaming on Criterion as well. It's got actually the Criterion channel has a really cool, like 3 or 4 minute, couple other of those Nikatsu action movies that are available on Criterion as well. They put out a whole box set a few years ago of some of these films that, you know, they're called Nikatsu action, but they're really more film noir. I think the Criterion box set is actually called Nikatsu Noir because that is a little more descriptive, I think, although this one in particular is an action film. It ends in a gunfight in the desert. And it's a badass scene. It's like these guys meeting to fight to shoot at each other in the, like when I say the desert, it is flat land everywhere around them, so there's nothing for them to hide behind, and so it is one of the most unique gunfights that I've ever seen in a movie.
It's interesting to think about like where these movies all like how they influence each other, just whether they acknowledge it or not. I mean, I guess Snowblood's one of the early ones, like with 73. But with the so
that's right.
I don't know. It's cool because Romero's clearly influenced by Argento, and so we've talked about Romero, and it just, I don't know. It's fun to think about like where all these guys, like you said, the spaghetti westerns like getting mixed in with these Japanese cinema. It's just fun to think about, like all these people pulling from each other.
Yeah, or all pulling from similar, or they're doing it separately and being influenced by similar things. Which it's hard to track it sometimes, but it's very interesting. Which is one of the things I love about doing series like this, because this whole series is all about how movies influenced each other.
Right.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to jump in real quick. We heard from Todd. Todd's feeling much better. He's starting to be on the mend after his bout of COVID, which we are very happy to hear. He was actually able to watch Lady Snowblood before he started feeling sick, so he out of COVID, which we are very happy to hear. He was actually able to watch Lady Snowblood before he started feeling sick, so he does have some thoughts. We wanted to give him a chance to let everyone know what he thought about the movie, even though he wasn't able to physically join us or virtually join us, since we're recording on Zoom for this particular episode. So I wanted to just let you guys hear Todd's thoughts on Lady Snowblood.
Hey everybody, it's your old pal Todd A. Davis here from the Cinema Shock podcast, here to weigh in with my thoughts on Lady Snowblood. Right off the bat, I didn't know this was based on a manga, but I, to my shame as a comic book fan, but I probably should have guessed due to the immense amount of plot crammed into such a tight movie. See also Akira. If anybody out there is familiar with Akira, we actually covered Akira on our old podcast some time ago, and I was on there talking about that. If you're familiar with depth and of that particular story, it's the film is actually pretty much the same in that they cram so much into such a tight space. There's no room for error. There's no room for Jesus in the gaps in that in that movie. So and this one follows suit. All the performances are great. Nobody seemed to be phoning anything in. I will go ahead and avoid trying to pronounce a lot of these movies or a lot of these actors' names, just because I'm just going to make myself look like an idiot, even more so than usual. So I feel like Quentin Tarantino got so much more out of this movie than certainly Thriller and maybe even Death Rides a Horse. I feel like he got story and style out of this movie in spades, really. And Death Rides a Horse is great, but it's no Lady Snowblood. So style out of this movie in spades, really. And Death Rides a Horse is great, but it's no Lady Snowblood. So now much of what I know about stories from China and Japan, here I'm going to put my idiocy on Front Street here. I learned most of what I know of Asian storytelling from the Matrix trilogy and their heavy influence. The Wachowskis using Asian influences in that trilogy. But knowing what I do know, even if it's on the surface level, I know most of the time the heroes die. And I feel like the catharsis of the end of Yuki's journey would have been so much better if she died at the end instead of waking up. She's fulfilled her life's journey or her life's purpose at that point in time. And I feel like that's such a nice closing of the circle, bringing it all back around. It started with the death of her mother, and it should end with her death. However, if you do that, you don't get any sequels. So I completely understand wanting the story to go on. But at the same time, it's kind of a toss up. Do you have one solid entry, or do you keep the thrills going? I definitely recommend this to anyone looking to jump in and explore Japanese cinema. I think it's a solid entry, and I might even go as far as to say you should get the box set for your own shelf. I think it would look great sitting next to any of Bruce Lee's movies, and certainly Crippled Masters. So thank you so much. My name is Todd A. Davis. Follow the show online. You can follow me at Mr. Todd A. Davis on everything. Keep an eye open for my Star Trek podcast, the Computer Resume podcast. It's going to be at Computer Resume on everything.
Expecting that or not, but I am happy to hear it. Glad he enjoyed this. I hope that you all enjoyed it as well. And we are once again very happy that Todd is feeling better. And we will have him back next week on the show as scheduled, along with another special guest. That's going to be really fun. So anyway, thanks, Todd, for calling in with your thoughts. And let's get back, I guess, to the regular show where we're going to wrap things up.
So that brings us to next week then. Next week, we will be actually sticking in 1973, but going to the other side of the world, to Sweden, to talk about a movie called Thriller, A Cruel Picture. You may see it called They Color One Eye, depends on which cut you're watching, but Thriller, A Cruel Picture, aka They Color One Eye, another major influence on Kill Bill, and a movie that Tarantino has called the roughest revenge film ever made. So should be fun.
Exciting.
So there are a couple different versions. We'll probably talk about both of them because I think me and Gary actually have two different versions. I think you've got the cut version that was released, has called the roughest revenge film ever made. So should be fun.
Exciting.
So there are a couple different versions. We'll probably talk about both of them because I think me and Gary actually have two different versions. I think you've got the cut version that was released in America.
I don't know, Justin. You told me yours has more porn in it, so I may
20 minutes more.
I may have to go for it.
20 minutes of extra porn. Yes.
If I could get educated and get off all of the same movie.
Like two birds, one stone right there.
There you go.
So we'll talk about that next week. But do you have anything else to add, Gary, for today?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, then, where can you be found on the internet?
I'm at This Is Gary Horne on everything. And Todd's still at Mr. Todd, or
Mr.
Todd
Todd
A. Davis.
Mr.
Yeah, we'll
Todd
give
A.
him
Davis.
props, even though he, bailed on us again with the COVID.
What an excuse. I am at Justin_Bishop. You can find the show cinema_shock or at cinemashock.net. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff. You can also buy our merch. We've got some t-shirts, hoodies, whatever you want. You want a face mask with our logo on it? You want a mug? We got all those. I just got mine in the mail. They're really nice quality. I'm very, very happy with them.
Very comfy.
So, very, very comfortable. The hoodie is I've been living in the last few days. Except it's like 60-something degrees in January now.
We're doing this by
South
Zoom, and
Carolina,
I can smell it from here.
Yeah. I washed it.
Oh, okay.
I'm not wearing it right now.
No, right.
It's too warm to wear.
He just
today.
showed me his nipples, everybody.
I did. Well, I guess that's it then. Until next week.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
Be excellent to each other. One good thing about Todd not being here, we don't have to hear his dumb catchphrase, which my wife bought on a T-shirt just to annoy me.
Johnny has the keys.
There's a Johnny has.